The Old Folk in the Autumn Plains, pre-landing, before 2164. For presumed millennia before its settlement, Astilion was wholly uninhabited by the likes of you or I. Instead, where our ilk was nowhere to be found, there were those who are now called the Old Folk. They are so named because, in defiance to all the histories of civilization elsewhere, it would seem that their civilization had existed since the dawn of time. The when of the rise of the Old Folk is ill-defined, with guesses running the gamut from 20,000 to even 90,000 years ago, and the newest dating of structures from their civilization is nearly 10,000 years ago. When the settlers from First Landing began the first migrations north on the continent, they were met with the bones of a once grand civilization. As they traveled deeper into the continent, they encountered massive roads and titanic bridges that had been abandoned for an eternity. Yet more fascinating were the tunnels, built into the ground at odd angles, several being sheared vertical drops, certainly leading to some unfathomable depth within the bosom of the land itself. Their purpose is not presently understood, but that has not been for want of trying. Some particularly brave, or as I am so inclined to call them, foolhardy adventurers, have taken up the implicit challenge they present and have, at various times, tried to descend them. The deepest exploration recorded a 2,000-foot vertical drop, with the expedition only stopping because the delvers had run completely out of rope. These tunnels were dubbed the Chutes by the original settlers, a name that survives as the common parlance for them to this day. The truly fascinating and perhaps most striking structures, however, are those designed to bury the dead of these primordial people. Obsidian obelisks whose architecture appears to be a truer philosophical statement on the nature of the world than any guru, dreamer, or metaphysician could ever muster. In total defiance of the physical world's various laws and logics, these monoliths appear as pyramids balanced somehow upon their pyramidions, in utter opposition to the ways of gravity, a fact that is especially astounding given that they average 500 feet tall. Seeing one come into focus for the first time as my companions and I rode closer was a touch harrowing. In their presence, and especially when gazing upon them, something about the world feels incorrect, incoherent, incomprehensible. While I am normally a valorous and noble explorer when faced with such monuments and relics of the past, I was given pause after pause by these structures. Eventually, all of us fled away, back onto the trail, without even a word between one another. So unnatural is the feeling around these ghosts of ghosts that one could be found wholly unlike themselves, and so out of sorts that their simplest desire is for a time when they were a further 100 or so feet away. These places were named gardens by the original settlers. As before, this name survives as the shorthand for them, if for no other reason than no one wants to approach or think about them long enough to fashion a new name for them. Despite my very reasonable personal compunctions with the idea, there have been those mad enough to conduct expeditions into them, and to paint them as merely revelatory would be an understatement worthy of academic condemnation. They found remains. From these expeditions, it was learned that the Old Folk were positively gigantic. The largest skeleton found was measured at a towering 20 foot head to toe. Most often they were buried in a form of robe assumed to be ceremonial in nature, though some were buried in armor. The armor and the weapons found in the gardens as well were melted down and examined. This metal has since been dubbed Elder Bronze. The finest smiths and tradesmen the world over have attempted to replicate the metal by alloying and even magic, to no avail. Elder Bronze stands out for its sheer sturdiness, being nearly unfazed by the average toils of use, though it is poor for making edged weapons or tools as it loses an edge exceedingly quickly. Despite this, it is highly valued and coveted in equal parts for its durability and its rarity. Its evidently unreplicable nature leads some less restrained scholars than I to ponder unnatural means for procuring it. Their gargantuan size and their masterful craftsmanship are evident in what remains of their work. Huge 80-foot-tall stone cuboids and archways remain, even after all the time that has passed since the end of the Old Folks' civilization. Many of the common people who live around these ruins have dubbed them the Barons, a name more commonly associated with bandits, blackguards, and all sorts of unsavory figures and horrific beasts, as many of them have made their homes in such places. This leads to even more propensity for avoidance when it comes to these sorts of things.